Thank you so much for your kind words. First of all, I have to thank Professor Lazaro and the Institute of Contemporary History for inviting me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have the possibility of presenting my work about that feminism in front of such a qualified audience. First of all, a short summary of my presentation. I'll begin presenting the path that led me to that feminism because it was really a long path. And then I'll take the issue of my presentation that is feminism. So the definition of feminism, the indicators, the criteria for identifying feminism, causes of feminism, and the position really different of Malthus and Amartya Sen. Then some thought about institution and markets, a really important topic if you deal with feminism. And finally, forthcoming research on this topic and the possibility of cooperation with others. So, as I said, the starting point of my path towards feminism and art has been a paper about water. About 10 years ago, I wrote a paper with the title For an Economic History of Water. So I tried to consider water in an economic history perspective. And my curiosity depended on nowadays problem, as in every historical research. The problem with water is that water is a perfect arable use, since it is exploited by many users, agriculture, industry, and domestic users. Here you can see the situation in the world regarding water use. You have agricultural use, industrial use, and domestic use. And there is a huge difference, as you can see, between high-income countries, where industrial use of water are overwhelming, and low and middle-income countries, where agricultural use are really predominant. The situation is also very different in the world. These maps are interesting because are created by the geographers of the University of Reading in the UK, and they created these maps considering world average. If a country is over the world average, the dimension of countries become larger. If it's under the countries closely. So you can see the area where you have great water consumption. North America, Europe, China, India, Africa is in completely different situation. So if you deal with water, the issue of scarcity immediately arises. So we created a research group together with some other Italian scholars, Guido Alfani, who teaches economic history in Open University in Milan, Donatella Strangio in Rome, Manuel Vaquero in Perugia, and we wanted to study and discuss the issue of scarcity in the long run. So we have a first conference, a first appointment in Perugia in 2011, and the issue of the conference was precisely the causes of scarcity from the modern period onwards. Here the book we published, the title is When Bread is Lacking, Causes of Scarcity of Foodstuff in Early Modern Period and Contemporary Period. This book is interesting because it has been our starting point, the starting point of our research. So the topics were really general. We have mainly two issues. The first regarding water and land. So the use of the most important natural resources in order to understand scarcity and health. The first part of the book deals with water, and especially with litigation and conflicts on water, conflicts between agriculture and the industry in early modern period, litigation about the use of water for agriculture in Lombardy from the Middle Ages onwards, but also the problem created by the building of barrages in 20th century, and so on. Then you have some contribution about land, the use of land in the long run. Well, the second part of the books deals with institutions, so the property of land. There is a paper by Paolo Tedeschi about commons in 19th century Lombardy, but also contribution about the state intervention in 20th century or in the 18th century. So we started with these great issues. In 2012, we had another appointment in Verona. In Verona was a little bit different because we tackle a more specific issue. This is precisely feminine in early modern period. And we wanted also to enlarge our vision, so we invited two great experts of this topic, Cormac O'Grada and Richard Doyle. The conference in Verona, if you look at the index of the book we published, was like in Perugia, divided in two parts. The first part is more general. We had intervention, for example, Luciano Palermo wrote a paper about the enlightenment approach by Sam applied to medieval feminines. Donatella Stangio and me wrote about scarcity in Papal State and Lombardy in the 18th century. Guido Alfani wrote a more general paper. In the second part, we had more specific contribution about causes of famine, for example, war or the climate, and also regarding attempt to coping with famine, introducing new crops such as potatoes, maize, and so on. Verona has been really important also because in Verona, with Cormac and Guido, decided to build a comparative book about feminism in Europe. And this book has been recently published by Cambridge University Press with Guido and Cormac as editor. From the beginning, we had the idea to build a truly comparative books. So we had a meeting in Bocconi University in Milan in 2014 with the scholar taking part in this project. Why? Because we wanted that every scholar answer the same question. Because we wanted a book, an homogeneous book, not a book made by contribution different. As Guido and Cormac wrote in their introduction to the book, as you can see, has been planned from the very beginning, that's really true, with a comparative perspective in mind. Each contributor has been asked to cover very large European regions and to attempt a reconstruction of the chronology of the main events as a key part of his or her discussion of the characteristics, the consequences, and the causes of feminism. So, here is the book. Joel Mokyr kindly wrote in his presentation that is one of the best anthologies of any topic in economic history to appear in a long time, and I think is true, because it's really a good book. The perspective adopted is a national perspective. We consider Europe, we consider countries within nowadays border for reason of simplicity, and we have contribution of a large part of Europe. Italy, the paper of Italy has been written by me with Alfani and Donatella Strangio, then we had Pérez Moreda on Spain, Velore Chevet on France, the Central Europe, that is nowadays Germany, Switzerland and Austria, Colleen Kremer, Low Countries, Daniel Curtis, Lambert, and some others, the Britain, Richard Doyle, Ireland, of course, Cormac, Ograda, Northern Europe, Scandinavia and Iceland, Drive also Svensson, and then Russia, Wetko. As you can see easily, there is a huge part of Europe missing, and precisely Eastern Europe and the Balkans. So that's the reason why I'm really happy of this conference, because the problem we had in thinking of the book is the difficulty of finding scholars dealing with these issues in this area. And so we have the middle of the Europe without contribution. So the first thing we did is the definition of famine. How can we define famine? Of course, the problem is that we have to distinguish between famine, that is a severe scarcity, from dearth, that is a simple scarcity. So this has been one of the main arguments of discussion also in Milan when we planned our book, since we wanted to write a book about famines and not about scarcity. The problem is really an old problem. As already Adam Smith says, there is a great difference between famine and simple dearth or scarcity of food. And only under specific conditions or circumstances that can develop in famine. So a simple way of identifying famine is that of the magnitude. The concept of magnitude is derived from geophysics and earthquakes and refers simply to the number of deaths. There is an article, a paper written by Owen Devereux. Owen Devereux are not historians, are economists, and they study mainly nowadays famine in Africa, so it's a contemporary approach. And they wrote this paper published in Disaster. The name of the journal is interesting. And they propose a scale. In this scale, as you can see, there are 5 degrees of magnitude regarding famine, A, B, C, D, E, and the grade depends on the number of deaths. If you have 1,000 of deaths, it's a minor famine. If you have more than 1 million of deaths, there is a catastrophic famine. But when they create this intensity scale, they take into account not only mortality rates, but also the social changes in the society in this condition of famine. There is degree 0, the situation where there is a food security condition, so the situation is normal. Then you have food insecurity condition, food crisis, until extreme famine condition. And the increase in the scale means also a destructuring of society, because we have many problems of distribution of food, prices increasing, and so on. We, however, adopted the definition by Cormac Ograda. Cormac Ograda defines a famine as famine refers to a shortage of food, of course, but or purchasing power that leads directly to excess mortality from starvation or hunger-induced disease. This definition is more intriguing because, as you can see, it deals not only with the consequences of famines, that is the number of deaths and barriers, but also with causes, both natural and man-made. So, Cormac provides a synthesis of 2 different views on the causes of famine, which can be seen either as man-made catastrophes, and we see as the position of Amartya Sen, or as a natural event that is the result of inadequate production, is the position of Malthus. It's clear, I think that's really important, that such explanations should not be seen as conflicting, but as complementary. It's impossible to say it's right, or only Malthus is right, or only Sen is right. So we have to find some criteria for defining feminine. So we have two main criteria. The first are the increases in mortality. These increases in mortality can be caused by starvation or hunger-induced disease. As Cormack clearly shown in this paper, in most of cases it's impossible to distinguish between the two possibilities. For the mortality, the fundamental sources, since we are historians, for reconstructing the timing and severity of the needs, are the series of death and burials, but are not simply to use it as we can see. The other criteria are prices, and so you have to use time series of prices of wheat and other foodstuffs. The advantage of time series of prices is that they are often available before the series of death and burials, because you have prices also in the medieval period. With death and burials, the situation is quite complex. And then prices allow to cover larger areas than the parish or community level that is of the series of death and burials. The problem with prices is that it's not a short correlation between in prices and presence of famine. This is a real problem, as we can see in the next slide. This slide is taken by the book, and by the paper written by Guido Donatelli about Italy. And this table refers to the criteria we use to identify the main famines in central northern Italy. So you have the number of cases. Cases regards communities, since it's the number of communities. You have communities with no crisis, and then community with crisis. You can see it's a different degree of crisis, from rising barriers within 100%, 200%, and 300% or more, so a big crisis. And in this way, we identify the period where famines occur, and you have the data. The problem with price is different. Here you can see the prices of wheat, and you can see the price increases during potential famine. We took the year when we have high mortality rates, and we look at prices. So you can see how the prices were over the normal levels. In bold, the year when were more than double than the normal level. But you can see there you have year when you have the high mortality rates, but prices were not so high. So there's not a direct correlation between the level of prices and the presence of famine. Then I think that price series can be really misleading. Why? I discussed with Guido and Cormac on this issue. Our position is a little bit different, but I think that the price series usually adopted have a strong bias. Why? Because they are mostly urban series regarding wealth. And that gives rise to a double contradiction. The first contradiction is that in the modern period, as you perfectly know, even in most urbanized areas, such as Lombardia, 75–80% of the population is in the countryside, and not in town and city. Second, outside the towns, modes of consumption were really different. Since wealth was not so important, in the countryside the consumption was less important than in towns and cities. Moreover, there was in countryside a relevant importance of self-consumption. So it's really misleading if you look at urban prices to understand if there is a situation of famine. Also because, last but not least, countryside was most exposed to that famine, at least in Italy, since it could not count on relief urban policies, l'annona, policy for food provisioning, and so on. What I think is that riots or protests would be a most accurate indicator of that famine in the countryside and the prices than those series of prices used by scholars and historians. Looking at Europe, the first important work we did is the reconstruction of a chronology of famine at European scale. Here you can see the situation in the book. Cormac e Guido made a more precise table, since they consider years of famine those years in which famine occurred at least in 2 regions of Europe. I prefer four regions. So you have Italy, Spain, France, Central Europe, the countries, Britain, Ireland, Northern Europe, and Russia, the countries considered in the drawing, and you can see the year of famine. I think it will be really important to do the same work on Eastern Europe and Balkans to see if the years are the same, there are differences between Eastern Europe and the Western Europe and Northern Europe with regards to famine. A second important issue is that of causes of famine. And as I told before, there are 2 completely different positions. The first position is the position of Malthus, is the supply side explanation. For this explanation, famines would be the result of nature, that is, of a shortfall in production. Looking at Italy, for example, but also to other countries of Western Europe, we find really a relation between famines and high population density. Famines occur mainly where the population was growing up. But, as Guido Alfani demonstrated, population density is unable per se to trigger famine. It's not enough. I think that the study of famines is really important because it's a way to come back to agricultural history. Because it's impossible to deal with famine without taking into account agricultural conditions. That means kind of property, there is property of commons, small plots or large tenure, the contracts, the labor relation in the countryside, the ways of exploiting land, so the state of technology, the productivity, the introduction of new crops, because as you can see, the introduction of maize really changed the situation in northern Italy with regards to the occurrence of famine. And then if you talk about agriculture and production of foodstuffs, another important question is, does climate matter? Which is the importance of meteorological conditions favorable to fundamental crops, rainfall during the spring, drought, etc. One important result of our research is that if you look at production, at agriculture, famines occur if you have back-to-back harvest failures. That means that it's not enough 1 year of a bad harvest to produce a famine, because there are reserve, there is the storage of cereal during the year. So a simple year of harvest failure is not enough to produce a famine. The problem is the case of the years of famine we identified in early modern Europe. If you have back-to-back harvest failure, 2, 3, 4 years of bad harvest, of course, the probability that famines occur increase. There are many papers about the correlation between the presence of famine and the so-called Little Ice Age, so the cold period in mostly in 17th century. If you look, in fact, this table, you can see that we have a lot of years of difficulties of famine in 17th century. In 18th century, famines became more rare, and in the 19th century disappeared. The last famine was in the famous year without summer at the beginning of 19th century. An important problem, this is really a controversial issue, is the relation, the causative link, if there is a causative link between famine and plague. But why? It's well known that malnutrition can favor the spread of disease, but disease such as typhus and dysentery. The problem with plague is more complex because scholars have also today many problems in identifying the pathogen of the disease with regards to plague. What is sure is that plague can produce famine, but not directly, but as it leads to the isolation of communities, disrupt the trade of pasta, compromise rural activities, and so can have an impact. An impact can have also crop disease due to fungi, particularly in wet season. It was the case of the wet rust at the end of 16th century, or the potato blight in Ireland at the middle of 19th century. The approach of SEN is completely different. Why? While Malthus considered famine the most dreadful resource of nature to solve the demographic imbalance produced by the effect in the idea of Malthus that population grows faster than production. Sen instead shift attention from the simple availability of food, the idea of Malthus, to the right of the local population to have access to it. Allora, Sen wrote this book, Poverty and Famine, an essay on industrial deprivation, looking at the great Bengala famine during the Second World War. The picture is a perfect synthesis of the idea of Sen, because it has been taken in Calcutta during the Great Bengala famine. And you can see people in good shape working on the street, while there is a man starving to death. So the idea of SEN is that famines result from the inefficient or unfair distribution of food. It's not a problem of production, but it's a problem of distribution. It's the problem of entitlement, as SEN did. The possibility to have access to food is anything completely different. So, in this idea, famines result from an unfair distribution of food and not from a deficit in production or food availability as Malthus thought. I have to say it's an odd idea since Smith first stated that famines in Europe had never arisen from any other causes but the violence of government attempting by the proper means to remedy the inconvenience of death. And it's the idea of Smith that market is the best solution. The visible event of market can solve every problem. In the idea of SEN, of course, we can say that nature is innocent and the man's guilty is a problem of distribution and of institution. Of course, if you look at institution and markets, we have to take into account a crucial issue. How did market work? Oh, I think it's really a problem because economists think that well-integrated markets are a solution for defeating famine. The problem is a problem of market integration. The solution is that markets work as the best possibility. But the problem is when such an integration of markets took place. If you read the book on grain market in Europe written by Persson said that a real market integration with regards to grains happened only in 19th century, after the building of railroads in Europe. I don't agree because I think that we have an international market of cereal integrated already in 18th century, as I said before. A second problem is which kind of market, because we have different levels of market. And in my opinion, the case of famine is a case of paradox. Why? Because in normal year, when you have normal condition, grain markets are usually local or regional, are a small scale of market. The market for grains becomes international and has an international scale precisely during famine. Because during famine, you can see the strong merchants that appear and intervene on the market. But in normal year, you can see this big merchant, great merchant. It's impossible to detect their presence. Of course, markets rise to some problems. This problem were presented by Cormac during our Milano pre-meeting when decided to write the book. Cormac, for example, talked a lot about moral economy, about protests and riots regarding food. Why? In the idea of Cormac, poor always are convinced at times that there is enough. The problem of the lacking of food is not a problem of availability, but it's a problem of hoarding, of speculation, of people who want to make profit with the famine. So another important question is who wins during famine? Merchants who traded the grain, money lenders. That's another important problem. We have two problems in answering this question. The first is we have few data about production, especially in early modern period, and also price data that are quite plentiful have the problems already highlighted in my presentation. Another problem are institutions. Institution, when we talk about institution, we refers to Annona and food provisioning institution. Alexander told me that in Eastern Europe, such institution was not widespread as in Italy, in early modern Italy. A fourth question is if the occurrence of famine triggered the development of both private and public institutions for food provisioning. In effect, if you look at Italy, Annona, the first experience of Annona were during the Great Famine of 14th century, so in the medieval period, and then Annona lasted for centuries, until the end of 18th century. Of course, in the book, one of the results of our book is that evaluating the role played by public institutions for food provisioning. But it's clear that famines are always also the result of the failure of such institutions. Such institutions were born or fighting famine, but in some cases we are not so efficient. Finally, I want to present some possibility of cooperation. Since we think that markets are really important in order to understand the evolution of scarcity that the famine, we organize some international conference. This is a session, a double session, in the next conference of European Social Science History in Belfast in next April. Is a double session are 10 papers about between asset scarcity, international trade market, in pre-industrial Europe. Why is it important? It's important because in our idea, this is a starting point for creating a group of scholars interested in grain markets in 18th century in order to create a network and to apply for an European funding in the following years. It's also important because for the first time we get scholars covering almost all Italy. So we have paper about Trieste, paper about Tirol, paper about Sicily, paper about the state of Milan, about the famine in the Kingdom of Naples in the 18th century, about the Republic of Venice, about the Papal State. But we have also Alexander who talked about Slovenia. We have Mikołaj Malinowski who talked about Poland. And Laura Prosperi with an issue really important if you consider the topic of famine, that is that of grain losses in the modern age. Because there is a problem not only of production without, with regards to grain, but also conservation. You have to find a way in order to conserve grain for years. So this panel is closed. It's not possible to take part in it, but I think it would be interesting to participate. This panel is still open since we think that international grain markets is really important in order to understand the problem of famine. We propose a session at the conference of European Business History Association in next September in Italy, in Ancona. Our idea is to investigate the role played by Swiss enterprises in grain trade, since we have seen that in Italy, during years of famine, players who dominated grain trade, international grain trades, were Jews. Jews from Mantua, from Ferrara, from Trieste. So this is our call for paper. As you can see, we want to understand the role played by Jews, but also, for example, to identify the trade routes and commercial points related to this market. So we have two main, I can say, ideas. The first is to have a reconstruction, a quantitative reconstruction of international trade of grains. That means flows, their direction, and so on. The second is more qualitative, and is precisely the reconstruction of network of merchants, of their strategies and their strategy. The last, but not least, is still open, is an open panel. It's at the next World Economic History Congress in Boston in August 2018. We want to investigate the role of maize. Because if you look at the experience of northern Italy, you can see that from 18th century onwards, famines disappear. But there is a correlation, a set correlation between the diminishing of famine and the apparently the overwhelming diffusion of maize in the countryside. So the idea is to analyze this issue with regards to the Mediterranean world. So we have scholars, Alexander, again, Ale Greco will talk about Tuscany, Emanuele Pinero about Umbria, Onasi about Friuli, Alvaro Aragone about this country, Giulio Ongaro about the state of Milan, Fazio about Sicily, and Guido Alfani will be discussed. There is still a possibility to present a paper in this session if someone is interested. So I think my time, so I thank you for your attention. If you have any question, problem, I'm here. Thank you so much.